Hello friends and welcome to the Tao of Goblin. Today we are going to talk about intent in juggling. This is going to be part of a series that we go a little bit deeper into the nitty-gritty of juggling. So we're going to get a little complex, but we're going to start with something that I think is very applicable and understandable for everybody. When you sit down to juggle, you have a goal in mind. Everybody has a goal in mind. They're trying to do a thing. That could be just, learning to do a basic cascade, or it could be something like working on a more complicated trick, such as like tennis, So anytime you're going to sit down to juggle, you have an intent in mind. And the same is true when you look at performance. When you sit down to do a performance, you're trying to do something. Otherwise, you wouldn't be on stage in front of people. You would just go hang out in your backyard and practice. So if you're on stage, you have intent. Even when you're practicing, you have intent. But it's a little bit more complicated when you're on stage. So maybe you've been working on a new trick and you want to show off your new trick and you're going to do some Mills mess. That could be an intent that you have. You could be thinking of it from a tech perspective and saying to yourself, well, I want to show off a large quantity of new tricks. So it could be, I want to show off that one and I want to show off this one. And so you sit down and show those tricks off. That is an intent that you have. And with that intent comes baggage. There's things you need to have done, practice you need to have executed on to perform that intent. And depending on what your intent is, you're going to go at it from a different perspective. So if you're a tech juggler, your intent is probably going to be consistency. And this is important. So as a tech juggler, your goal is to show off something that's new, something people haven't seen before. And I'm not going to show you that, but we can just give an example, right? Maybe it's this sort of a pattern, and that's your intent, is to show off how consistent you are at that pattern. As a flow juggler, your intent is very different. There's lots of different intents you could have. I think as a tech juggler, your intents are much more limited. Generally, you're trying to show off the new tech. As a flow juggler, you could be thinking about a lot of different things. You could be thinking, well, I want to show some transitions, right? I want to move quickly between a bunch of different tricks. Or you could be thinking, well, I want to show a general family of tricks. Maybe you want to show some columns tricks. So you're going to do a bunch of columns tricks to sort of show these off. Or you could be listening to music and performing to music, and then you're thinking, well, I want to be rhythmically sound. If you want to be rhythmically sound, there's a bunch of stuff that comes with that. Consistency is no longer particularly relevant to you, for instance, right? Consistency doesn't make good performance to music. Music is not consistent in a lot of ways. If you're dealing in electronic music, you might have a consistent bass beat, bum, 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 which you might want to be on, but at the end of the day, you want to be on rhythm. So you could be trying to represent different things like synth. You want to focus on the synth and perform to that synth. So you want to execute tricks that follow the rhythm that the synth is following. Or you could be trying to show off, again, families of tricks. So you could say, well, okay, for this particular section of music, I want to execute a particular columns routine. So you're going to do a bunch of columns tricks, and then you're also going to try and keep them in rhythm. So there's a lot of different intent you could have as you sit down to juggle. And I think it's important as jugglers that we think about, what are we trying to accomplish? What do I want my audience to take away from this? Do I want them to think, wow, that was rhythmically really interesting? Do I want them to think, oh, I see what you were doing there. There were lots of circles in that sort of pass that you did. Or are you trying to mix them all together? I think that in dealing with flow, there is an element of consistency. You need to know where your balls are at any given time, and you need to be able to catch them in rhythm and be able to execute on your tricks. And to do that, you need to have some level of consistency. But it's a different kind of consistency from dealing in something like tech, where I want all of my throws to occupy a very particular location. In tech juggling, when you're just showing off a trick, you know what your rhythm is. Your rhythm is going to be something like this. Very consistent, and you want it to always be throws at the same height, and you don't want your rhythm to change. But if you're performing to music, you have to fit the rhythm that's been presented to you. And so in that case, you need to achieve that mission you've set for yourself. And that may not be consistency. That may be just following a certain drum line, hitting a certain snare, hitting a spike at the right time. So I think intent is something we don't think enough about in the juggling community. I think we can look at what our goals are and then accomplish our missions based off of that. Something that comes into this, of course, is if you want to have intent, you need to already have practiced a lot. You need to be able to execute on a trick when you want to execute on it, and you need to be able to change rhythm or not change rhythm depending on what fits your intent. So I'd encourage you all to think more about what your goals are when you sit down to juggle, what the environment is that you're in, and what you want people to take away from your performance. By thinking about intent, we can accomplish greater, better performances, and we can get better reactions from our crowd. And I think at the end of the day, if you're performing at least, crowd reaction is what you're after, even if you're on the internet. You're trying to get people to feel a certain way about the tricks you're doing, trying to get them to have a certain reaction to the things that you've executed upon. And we can only do that by thinking about intent. I'm going to talk to you more over the coming weeks about some of the deeper juggling things. I want to go real deep. I want to talk about some things that'll appeal to the hardcore juggler. So I hope you'll come back and see me soon. We're going to talk about things like rhythm, trick transitions, all sorts of things that may not appeal to the lighter weight juggler, the less intense juggler, but I hope that the people who are more in there, more obsessive, will find these things to be useful, interesting, enlightening. Thank you for joining me. You should push my follow button because you're going to want to see the rest of this content. So I hope you'll join me next week while we talk about some more in-depth topics. I'll talk to you soon.